Just growing the top line and increasing expenses at the same time doesn't solve your problem. You can't just throw bodies at it. You need to be smart about how you operationalize your business. And that's a big area that CEOs have a blind spot.
This is Revenue Remix, where we share founder stories, hard won lessons, and call out BS on anything that doesn't actually grow your business. I'm Summer Poletti, host and producer. Behind the mic, I'm a revenue growth architect for B2B SaaS and fintech orgs, scaling without chaos. If your growth feels stuck, or if you're planning your next big thing, you're in the right place. I have with me William Lieberman, founder and managing director of the CEO's Right Hand. I love that, by the way, a firm that helps CEOs get strategic finance, HR, and operations support without building a giant back office. He's a long-term operator and fractional CFO who's sat in the room for the messy growth conversations that most founders would rather avoid. And that's entirely what we do here at Revenue Remix. So welcome, William.
Thanks, Summer. Great to be here.
Great to have you. And I give a shout out to whoever introduces me to a new collaborator or a guest. And it was Bordy AI that introduced us. You can meet some great folks, and it's super easy, especially for introverts. So, William, we feature the whole person here. So let's get started with an early job or a youth activity that might be surprising to the audience.
Okay, so I'm going to date myself a little bit.
Okay,
Back
no
when
judgment.
I was probably 12, 13 years old, I built a computer from a kit, but I
Nice.
built, with a soldering iron and capacitors and resistors and chips and motherboards and good stuff. And
Okay,
I
you're
put it all
saying
together.
build, like build. Wow.
Oh, yeah, build. So this is way back before Apple was even a thing. And it was great. And I learned how to do programming on it, and it was a blast. It was how I fell in love with technology. And so that's how I started my career is in technology.
That is somewhat surprising, but when I hear CFO, I think maybe there's a nerd in there.
Right.
Kind of track. So let's get right into it. When you start working with a CEO, they usually have a theory. At least in my world, they do. We need more pipeline. We need better comp plans. We need more salespeople. What is an example where their diagnosis was not accurate and the real blocker was somewhere else in the sales versus finance system?
Well, there have been times where people have said, CEOs have said, I need to grow revenues and et cetera, et cetera. And that's fine. And growing revenues, of course, is important, and we should all focus in on that. But that's not the only thing. And so they come in and they say, hey, I need to grow my bottom line by growing the top line. And I said, well, sometimes that's true, but sometimes you're not operationally focused and you need to fix your infrastructure, your back office, because you're wasting money in how you run your business. And so just growing the top line and increasing expenses at the same time doesn't solve your problem. You can't just throw bodies at it. You need to be smart about how you operationalize your business. And that's a big area that CEOs have a blind spot.
Completely agree. If you're growing revenue at the same pace that you're growing expenses, your bottom line essentially flatlines. I love that. So sometimes guests are gifted with a question that I didn't prepare them for. So you get a gift today. Where are areas where you see leakage, or I want to be nice here instead of being like, where are there areas where they can trim without harming the business? Like where are the leaks that they could cut before they start adding more bodies in sales, for example?
So a lot of places today, even as we sit here, are not looking at technology the right way. They're not integrating systems. They're not integrating data. They're not leveraging the use of AI, which is coming fast and furious for everybody. And so they need to really take a step back and say, hey, instead of just increasing the hours that XYZ person is doing, performing this function, whatever that means, it could be sales admin, it could be anything, they need to take a look at what's the right way to be doing this piece of the business. What's the right way to operationally function so that we don't have to just, again, throw more bodies at it. So I think one of the things that CEOs need to think about is how do we leverage technology? How do we leverage automation? How do we leverage AI in a way that enables us to truly scale the business, not just grow the business. And so we spend time with our clients thinking about those issues more and more, especially with AI, so that they understand what it can do, what it can't do, and where to effectively invest in the business so that they can achieve those economies of scale, in the next year or so, or maybe even sooner.
Yeah, and I like to think of AI as I know it's really powerful, but it is another technological evolution. It's kind of the same as it has been 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You want to look for some efficiency. You're growing. Do you need to leverage some technology, or do you need, where can you automate redundant tasks that are overly manual or things like that before you throw some extra bodies at it?
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
like
Like,
that.
we use, as an example, we use our B2B, right? So we know when somebody visits our website, we know what page they were on, we know their LinkedIn information, we can contact them. So we have to, but today, even still, we're manually looking at those page visits and deciding which ones make sense or not to go reach out to, and then we manually send an email, etc. Now, we don't have a volume of larger businesses, so we can do it manually. It doesn't take us a long time, but at some point, we would want technology doing that whole process flow so that we wouldn't have to do it. There'd be a human in the loop overseeing it, but I can see bigger businesses absolutely leveraging the way an AI agent to connect all those disparate systems and to make all that happen seamlessly.
Yeah, yeah, and I like the human in the loop because the CRM or it doesn't always know who's really a good fit. So I just find that I still need to come in and go like, "No, you got it wrong, AI. We'll get there soon. I'm not quite ready to like fully automate those type of flows yet." Let's get back to what we had planned. That was great. Thank you. When you look at a growth stage company's P&L or board deck, what are the 2 to 3 metrics that tell you immediately whether sales is building healthy growth versus just jamming deals over the line?
Right. So you want to look at the most important thing is gross margins, right? So I always start with gross margins. So revenues minus cost of goods sold. Even if you're a services business, your cost of goods sold is cheaper used to deliver the services. If you're in a product business, it's the cost of the product. So you want to look at margins, gross margins, but not just at an overall level, right? You don't want to just look at the P&L as it comes straight out of your accounting platform. You want to look at gross margins by service line, by product line, by SKU if you really are doing large volumes, right? You want to look at if you're in the services business, what I do is I look at gross margins client by client every month. So I can see which ones are trending up, which ones are trending down, where is a potential problem coming so that I can be more proactive and less reactive. And that's critical, especially in the services business, so that you understand where your labor is effectively being utilized and where maybe you have room to, tighten things up. Because if your gross margins are 20% on a particular client when they should be 60 or 50, you have a problem. You know that there's either a client service problem or there's some other issue that's causing you to spend a lot more time and energy on a particular client. I've had some clients of mine actually, told them you need to fire this client or that client because it's not profitable at all. So that's, I think, the first and foremost thing is look at gross profit by service, by product, by client, and then from there, operating margin. So how much are we making? How much are we, spending again to run the machinery as a percentage of revenue? And is that going up? Is it going down? And you want to look at things like sales and marketing spend as a percentage of revenue. If you're in a growth stage, you want to be spending more on sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue than if you're in, a lifestyle business or just, maintenance mode. And you wanna dictate, or you need to figure out and model out how much can I afford to spend? What's the return on investment or return on ad spend, if you will? But what's the return that I expect on this spend over the next 6, 9, 12 months? Because some of this takes time to actually generate return, and that's based upon
Yes.
historical data.
Yes. Oh my god.
There's a lot there.
I talk to
That's the quick
everybody I
answer.
talk to, by the way. Yes, these things take time. We're not going to fix your company in 2 weeks. It's just not going to happen. I like that you took it to the product lines or services and also by client. That feeds directly into a number of the different touch points that I do. And it's all about scale what works, kill what doesn't, and doing it data based is helpful. You might like that client, but if they're a loss leader, they gotta go.
Right.
Um,
Right.
that that product line that you came up with that was your great idea, it might be your great idea, but if it's not earning you money, it's gotta go too. No, I like that a lot. And then where I'd want to take it is to align the comp plan with what's most profitable because salespeople will chase what feeds their wallet. And so if you incentivize them the right way, they'll bring in the stuff that's going to be most profitable.
100%. 100%.
Great
So
way to
like,
do
if,
it.
for example, if you want to build a valuable business, recurring revenue is more valuable than non-recurring revenue. So you want to compensate your salespeople higher on recurring revenue deals than not.
Yep. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yes. So then you've seen companies grow top line revenue and still end up in trouble. What is a time when you saw sales win on paper, but the folks in finance knew it was a losing game? And then let's also, like, what should sales leaders have seen in the numbers sooner? Like, where's the lesson there?
So I think part of the issue, one example is a technology business that brought in sales, but they were resale deals, right? So they're reselling technology. So, and they were doing some systems and implementation of that technology, but the margins were super low, right? So, they did a $3 million deal, but the margin was 10% or maybe even 5% at the end of the day. So if you're implementing, right, if you're adding services to that mix and maybe you get a little bit more margin on the services, but if you're just pushing paper and doing reselling, at some point the margins are so thin that it doesn't matter how much you sell at the top line. It's still a losing proposition because your back office, you're still going to have to spend time administering, invoicing, collecting, legal, insurance, bank fees, et cetera, et cetera. And you got to have a minimum margin level. I've seen places where the salespeople have the authority to actually discount and make their own deals, which erode the margins significantly. And that's a mistake, right? So, one of the things that I always tell clients is when especially if you're B2B enterprise deals or anything that's larger than a few $1,000s, right? You want to have finance sign off on those, quotes before they go to the customer, right? So, hey, how much are we thinking of selling this? And by the way, service, I call it customer success, but customer service needs to sign off as well because sales is signing up customer service or delivery to do this, this, and this. Sales is signing up finance for this amount of margin. And so if those three legs aren't all agreed, and look, they're not always going to agree. And that's the CEO's job is to say, hey, it's okay, we can take a risk on this one, and this is why. But typically you want to have a process that's very procedural. Say, okay, here's the quote. If we need to have a quick call, let's have a quick call. Customer success, here's what we want to do. Sales, right? Here's what we want to do. Finance, here's why we want to discount this, or here's the concession I got. If I discount it this year, they're going to pay more next year, or whatever it might be. Those types of getting that system in place so that everybody's communicating, everybody understands the nuances of the deal and the pricing of the deal and the service that's being delivered, that creates a successful story, a successful way of implementing deals, right? And in such a way that you're not chasing the top line without understanding the impact to the bottom line. And if sales is just selling just to get the deal done and they don't understand the margins and the labor, et cetera, that's a recipe for failure.
I have seen it before. I made an interesting path from customer service to customer success into sales. So I sat in the customer service seat with those loss leader deals given to me, with I think the worst was a 67% discount. And I was like, how on earth how am I going to pay my people with this? I don't understand, and they were like, well, sucks to be you. It's like, no, no, no. I would encourage people. Yes, we got to be aligned. It has to be profitable. It's just the reality. They're coin operated. Usually they're 50%, if not more, of their compensation comes from those incentive based. So they're going to sell it because they know they'll make money. And they need to also understand where the profitability is. And that if you sell below this price, the company doesn't make any money. So yeah, you have to structure the pricing plans very carefully. I
And look,
agree with that.
you can get in. There's a whole interesting conversation around compensation plans and compensation strategy. We do this work ourselves for our clients. But one of the things that I just want to highlight is the sales leader. Yes, they're going to get overrides and maybe they're carrying a bag, so they get commissions themselves. But one of the things that I want people to think about is for your sales leader, compensating them on your bottom line, just like you would compensate your head of client success, just like you would compensate your head of finance and admin, right? Everybody, if you have everybody compensated on how much is you're throwing to the bottom, they're going to be aligned to throw money to the bottom. Just a thought.
I like that. I hadn't really. Okay, I'm not a huge fan of bag carrying sales leaders. That's a topic for another day. But yeah, instead of giving them an override on all the deals, to give them their override from the bottom instead of the top. I love that.
Exactly. You make it a factor,
Yeah.
right? So there's always going to be multiple factors, but one of which would be, there's going to be a profit pool set aside for the exec team, and you get a piece of that. And the more you discount, the less your piece is going to be.
And then I'm going to encourage people to figure out a way to systemize some of these discounts or approvals. B2B buyers don't really tolerate delays anymore. So, like, if the quote takes 72 hours to get to somebody because there's some meetings they already bought from your competitor.
My team, I tell them because I do this, right? So my head of client success, my head of finance accounting, and then our COO, they're on notice. Sales is your number one priority. So if I ping you, you have 5 hours, 6 hours to get back to me.
Being a sales leader by trade, I love hearing that sales is number one.
We're a sales-driven organization.
Awesome. Okay, so the reason why I wanted you on the show is to talk about getting sales and finance better aligned. I feel like those are the folks who don't necessarily really like to talk to each other. If we could get into personality types, they're about as far away as possible. So I totally get it. So walk us through a client anonymously where sales and finance were clearly misaligned, which led to some growth stalls, because that's what we care about on this show. And just talk us a little bit through like what helped them turn it around.
Right. So I think, a good example would be, back to so B2B, right? So B2B services where, sales is kind of like what we were talking about just now. It's sales is out there hunting, and they're hunting for anything they can get, and anything that lands in the boat, they're going to kind of kill. Well, but finance, they're risk averse by definition, and they should be, right? They're out there looking for the shareholders, and that could just be the CEO, because the CEO is the owner founder. But they're out there looking out for the shareholders, and they're going to do whatever they can to ensure that nothing upsets the apple cart, right? And so there's sometimes a misalignment in what their personal goals are because they're not aligned to, like I was alluding to before, the overall corporate strategy and corporate goals together, right? You got to have all the oars pulling together towards the same exact goal. So finance's goal, and again, this happened in the services business, is finance's goal is just ensure that we can make payroll and we got to close the books on time, et cetera, et cetera. They don't want to have any deal coming from sales that smells different than some other deal where they don't have a process by which they can administer it. It's a pain in the butt to invoice. They can't track the time where people are putting in their time because this deal isn't time tracking. It's a different model, on and on and on. So when you have salespeople who are incentivized to go out and kill anything they can, they're going to come up with any scheme they can, any pricing method, etc. And finance has to deliver it. That's a problem. So this
Yeah.
is back to my point where if sales wants to create a pricing quote, they need to run it by finance and get finance sign off before they deliver it to the customer. Because if they come up with some, hey, okay, if the month has a R in it, you only have to pay us half as much. All of this type of stuff where your systems can't support what the salesperson is coming up with, then
Yes.
it doesn't make sense to do those deals. And so I've seen this in professional services. I've seen this a little bit in software and SaaS type businesses where, again, they're not aligned, but I guarantee you it happens all the time. And it's easy to fix. It's hard to reinforce, but that's the CEO's job, is to make sure that he or she is reinforcing, here are the goals that we're all trying to achieve and why. And you sales and you finance and you client success, you guys all got to be on the same page. And to make sure you're all on the same page, I'm going to pay you based upon how you do as a team, right?
Yeah. I love it. It's like you describe every person that comes to me looking for help. There's a lot of and it's fine when it's a startup and it's the founder doing the selling and then they bring in somebody they know, a former colleague, maybe it's somebody in the family or something like that. It's real scrappy. That's a great vibe. I love that. But then when they want to grow, they're kind of used to just everybody dig in and do it and everybody do it their own way. And I find that what leads to what you described is like a lack of documented processes, lack of structure, lack of like, get your sales house in order, set up boundaries, set up playbooks. If you give your sales folks a fenced in yard, you can play in this yard, and then anything outside of that has to get approval. They'll pretty much play in the yard because they don't like the red tape of getting approvals.
100%.
I
100%. As
think,
long as
yeah,
the yard's big enough.
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, we don't wanna restrict them, but yeah, put your hunters in a yard, 100%. But okay, so we're gonna pause for a quick break from my sponsor, but stick around because after the break, William's gonna dig into what to do with new funding, cha-ching, how to fix your forecast, and how to run the one meeting where sales and finance can actually solve problems together.
If your growth feels stalled and your teams aren't rowing in the same direction, you're not broken. Your structure is. At Rise of Us, we help B2B SaaS and FinTech orgs between 2 million and 30 million ARR turn fragmented sales, marketing, and customer success teams into one unified revenue engine. Go to theriseofus.com and book a chat to explore because your next phase of growth deserves a strategy that won't buckle under the pressure.
Welcome back. Okay, let's get into it. A lot of founders assume that raising a round means adding more reps. Usually the investors want to see some money invested into sales and marketing, especially if it's at like Series A and B, right? So from your seat as a fractional CFO, what do you wish the CEOs and CROs would do differently with new capital and headcount so that they don't end up with bloated teams and fragile economics?
So, first and foremost is to have a plan. You'd be surprised how many people do this from the seat of their pants.
I would
You
not.
put
Go
together
ahead.
we always recommend having a solid forecast model
Mhm.
spreadsheet that shows, here's what we've done in the past. And again, I'm sure they have a model to go raise the capital, but still, you want to do a deeper dive. Sometimes those investor models aren't as detailed as an operational model. So there's a difference there. But let's assume you have a model. You want to make sure that you do a deep dive. You have all the data so that you can say, hey, historically, here's how many SQLs or how many MQLs we need. Here's a conversion rate to SQLs. Here's our close rate. So given that by channel, right? So we have our referral partners and they give us X number of MQLs and blah, blah, blah. And here's our close rate. SEO or GEO now gives us this, channel by channel. Here's all the data that we have historically. So again, we're not just going to throw bodies we're going to think about how many partnerships do we have and how many new partnerships can we successfully go get? How much business can we get from each of those? How many reps do we need to close each of those, et cetera? And so you model out your whole hiring plan based upon your
Yes.
historical data, number one. Number two, you're going to look at how can we do this in a much more cost-effective way. So we're not just going to go get any sales exec or any account exec. We're going to go get maybe two super high level people, but then we're going to have one sales admin that supports maybe those two plus maybe three or four other ones because they're using AI. So make sure that we have the support team under that so that we maximize the effectiveness of the higher level people. That's so important, right? So you can't just have 20 high level sales execs without support underneath them. And again, back to our prior conversation, we want to make sure that we do that in a way that's you're using technology, you're using automation, you're using AI, you're making most effective use. And to the extent that you need junior people doing junior level work, maybe there's some nearshore resources or offshore resources. There's ways of doing this in a very cost effective way, as opposed to, again, just throwing bodies at it. I get it. Investors want to see growth quick, and you have to, as that funding closes, you have to be ready to go. So when I talk to people that are fundraising as opposed to just completed it, I say, okay, as soon as that money comes, what are you planning on doing with it? Because that could be 2 months from now, 3 months from now, 4 months from now, whatever it might be. Who are you planning on hire? Let's see those resumes. Have you had discussions with them? Be prepared so that when the gun goes off, you can dash quickly. And so you have to prepare yourself. You have to make sure you know what you're doing. You have to have the data to support it, and you have to have the systems and people that enable those higher level salespeople to shine. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that you added the nearshoring. I'm a huge fan of that. That time zone alignment is really big in growth stage scale ups.
We use nearshore resources ourselves, and it's a
Yeah.
godsend.
It's excellent. Like no more waiting until tomorrow to get the answer. No, thank you.
Right.
But yeah, I do see people overspending, get a whole bunch of like, this guy killed it at my big competitor with the plan, using air quotes, that like he's going to bring over his entire, it's not a Rolodex anymore, right? The people in his phone, I guess is what we might call it. Like, yeah, they're all going to buy. Like, that is not a strategy. From the
Big
sales leader in the room, that never works.
I think one of the biggest errors I've seen is a CEO giving a sales either leader or sales exec too much rope, right? And they give them too many chances to
Yes.
succeed, and they continue to fail and continue to fail. And there are some CEOs that are reticent to pull the trigger on making a change, and that's probably the one of the biggest problems I see on this, from a CEO managing down and not doing a good job leading the business. Because the problem is if they give that salesperson or sales leader too much room to run and they fail or they're not delivering, other people on the team are looking at the CEO saying, why are you letting Bob or Jim or Jane just continue to fail and not shooting them? That doesn't make any sense to me. And why do you continue paying them the salary you're paying them, et cetera, et cetera? You need to make a change. Otherwise, I'm losing faith in you as CEO and I'm going to go look somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah, it's a huge morale killer when you're way too empathetic. And no one can fool you quite like a Hollywood actor or a salesperson. That's it.
Now, the great thing about managing a salesperson is their numbers are their numbers. It's just black and white.
Yeah.
Either you
Yeah.
close a deal or you don't close a deal,
Yeah.
right? They could play with, okay, is it a qualified lead or not? Like, where in the pipeline is it really? But what I've heard lots of salespeople say is, no, they're just having a meeting. The board meeting coming. Blah blah blah. Oh, the board didn't get together last time, but they're going to talk about this on guaranteed. My contact says no problem. Blah blah blah, and they just continue to do that, and nothing moves. So you measure. What I do is I measure the velocity of the pipeline. So how quickly are things moving from stage to stage to stage?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you can do that sales rep by sales rep, and you can tell which rep isn't delivering on moving stuff from the top of the funnel out to the down to the bottom.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the rep and sometimes it's the leader has a problem because, I can look at a CRM and I can tell you within moments where the problem is. And usually the problem is not enough volume of outbound. They're
Right.
relying only on inbound. The messaging is off. It's like super, hi, do you want a demo? Or they're not qualifying. I see this in SaaS more than professional services, but like anybody who got a demo totally loved the product and they're totally going to buy better qualification. So let's see. Every CRO says their forecast is getting better. I feel like you teed this up perfectly. And then every CFO is like, okay. So what changes have the biggest impact on making the forecast something that finance can actually trust and sales can stand behind without smoke and mirrors?
Right. So one of the things I do is sit down with the CRO and look at their prior forecasts.
Mm-hmm.
So show me the forecast from a year ago, and what did you say would happen and when and
Ooh, yes.
etc. And then ask finance, okay, show me what happened, and then let's compare those two things. And so now we know how much to haircut whatever sales tells us. Are we haircutting what they tell us by 20% or and you go back as long as you can. Like sometimes if a CRO has been around 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you have a lot of data, a lot of history, and you can
Yeah.
do it quarterly, right? So you have more data points, but you can get a flavor for how accurate is the sales leader's forecasting ability. And by looking at what he or she said in the past and what actually happened in the past, that's the
Yes.
best indicator for what's going to happen going forward. Then you could say, okay, so you said, you're going to increase your close rate by X%. Why? What's different now? What are you doing differently? Show me what you have changed in order for me as the finance person to change my percentage haircut on what you're going to tell me, right? So I need to know the exact specific tactics, right? So that I can get at least a flavor for what that is. Now, separate and distinct from that, the finance person is always going to use a different number than the sales. So sales is going to have a quota, and finance's forecast is always going to be a number below that, right? And lots of times what I do is I tell my clients, we need to have a best case, worst case, and a base case forecast. And I have, ways of just doing quick modeling. So you could say, okay, which case am I using? And so I could say, okay, well, the CRO is telling me this. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to make it, this is the percentage haircut because of what happened historically. That's my base case. And then the CRO says, yeah, but this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Okay, great. That's our best case. And then the CEO and the rest of the executive team and the board can decide, okay, what investments are we willing to make given best case, base case, and worst case potential play, how that's going to play out.
Yeah, I like that bucketing, and I'm only laughing because I'm having flashbacks to when I was a director of ops, and my budget was always based on, like, okay, I take your forecast based on what you did over the last couple of years, and I'm going to forecast 20% of what you forecast. And they get all mad at me, and I was like, this was the last 3 consecutive years, and then, well, but this year's going to be different. Sure.
People say that all the time.
I know, right? I do like the bucketing though, because I feel like because there's a best case in there, you give the CROs what they want, which is recognition of they have to be optimistic, right? Their optimistic projections. And then you give the CFO what they feel like is their realistic projections. And it's always going to land somewhere in the middle. I like the buckets. Perfect. Okay, so we have been talking a little bit about compensation. I want to focus on compensation right now because compensation is where sales and finance will actually fight. I have had those fights before. What are the most expensive mistakes you see in sales comp plans? And how can revenue leaders and finance leaders design something that rewards the right behaviors, but without blowing out the budget?
Right. So one of the things is paying the sales commission when the deal closes, right? 100% of the commission paid out, as opposed to, hey, we're going to pay out when we get paid. The second one is the ideal. The first one is what the sales rep wants. The second one is what finance wants. So it's always going to be kind of in between. But I've seen people where they pay out 100% of the commission due day one, right when the deal signs. And then the client, for whatever reason, the implementation takes a lot more longer. It's a lot more expensive. The margins aren't what we thought it were going to be. Client delays, and it takes months, if not a year or two, for them to get going, on and on and on. But the sales rep's paid and they're on to the next. I've even seen it where that client cancels, and then you have to go
Yeah, that's
claw
where my
back,
mind went. Yeah. Ugh.
right? You have to claw back, and that's a fight. So anyway, because the salesperson's like, well, I did my job, right? Just because they canceled, it's not my fault, right? So there's a whole litany of problems. And look, in an ideal world, you want that sales rep, as you say, you give them the incentive to go hunt. If you're talking about hunters as opposed to farmers, right? So you want them to go hunt, and you want to reward them for, throwing the spear and killing that game. So you need to really make sure that your compensation strategy aligns with that, of course, but at the same time we need to understand that there's a real world happening. Once that deal closes, things continue to happen. And so if the sales rep has some skin in the game. So one of the things I did when I had my software business is we would pay them out 75% of their
Mm-hmm.
commission when it closed, and then the other 25% when the client went live. Now this was a
Mm-hmm.
SaaS business. So that gave them a little incentive to say, okay, how's it going, Bob? Are you still, is everything on track? How's my team doing? Right. So there's still, it's not account management, but it's touching until such time as the implementation goes live. And that worked well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a hybrid, it's a compromise, but it allows sales and finance to align on a successful client implementation.
I like that. I've done even longer payouts for exactly the reason you mentioned. What comes to mind is a client that was having a lot of churn within the first year or two with new clients. Another SaaS, long deal cycles, long implementation cycles, even longer conversion cycles, because you have all your customers over here and you don't blink and they're over here. So we needed the sales rep staying in the game and continuing to call them monthly or quarterly, but they're not incentivized to do that, right? They have to go get, they're not incentivized to farm. So there was like a super minuscule, was it 1% or something like that through like the first 3 years, as long as they could prove that they made those outreaches, and it worked like a charm. And then I also encourage sales folks to think of it as an opportunity for a referral. It is a sales related activity to check in on somebody. Oh, you're happy. Great. Do you know anyone else? Right?
Right.
It can, if you position it right, it can be a sales related outreach and not just housekeeping. I like that. So let's talk about meetings. My favorite,
Okay.
right? If you were redesigning a recurring meeting where sales and finance actually work together on the business, not just review a deck or complain or point fingers at each other, like who's in the room, what gets put on the agenda, what decisions could come out of that meeting. I mean, we're kind of envisioning a sales and finance actually get along type of kickoff. What might that look like?
So we have a weekly executive team meeting where sales and finance obviously are all in the room. That's the best place. The sales and finance leaders can communicate again with the other people in the room about, hey, here's an issue that I'm facing. I can't sell this at this price. I need help. I need help figuring this out, right? So what we do is we maintain an issues list that we bring up on a weekly basis so that we make sure everybody gets through their issues. And if there's something that's going to take a real long time, we just say, okay, that's a sidebar meeting. Let's go put that on the calendar. In terms of a standing meeting that just sales and just finance would be on, it would be something that's a more tactical because you want to have that strategic conversation with the other executive team members in the room. You don't want to just have that in a silo because client success could say, no, you want them hearing what's that discussion is going on because they're going to be responsible for delivery, right? So you can't
Yeah.
just have sales and finance coming up with some
No.
scheme on their own. So you want the executive team working together, number one. But if sales and finance have their own meetings, it would be something, again, more tactical. Here are the deals I struggled with getting over the finish line. Finance, can you help me think through how I could position this better in order to have a successful close for this? Because for some reason we couldn't get there. Now, maybe it's not related to finance, maybe it's not related to pricing at all, but still, there could be ways where finance can contribute to the conversation in such a way that it enables a higher close rate for those sales reps. And so I think having a regular touch point where finance is hearing what's going on from the field is very valuable too, right? Because finance can then say, we need to think about how we're going to rejigger this, and this, because sales is saying they're going to be selling more and more of that thing over there. and we're not prepared for that increased volume. So
Yeah.
we need to understand what's coming on in the future
Mhm.
from the people that are on the ground every day. And I think that
Yes.
feedback is helpful as well.
Sure. No, I definitely like everybody getting together in the same room. Sometimes it's 12 people, gets a little busy. And I like that you focused it around help because everybody wants to help. So if it's here's what I'm hearing from the field, here's where our struggles are, is there any way that you can help? I think that's a good place to start with. And getting everybody together like that in some sort of a planning type of scenario, I liked to do that, I don't know, a couple times a year. Beginning of the year planning, mid-year adjustment to have those little one-offs. Um, that's helpful. Let's see. If it's a growth stage company and they're having some of that sibling rivalry, it happens more often than we want to think. I agree with you that the CEO is responsible for herding the cats. What would you recommend they do to take control of a meeting where, hey, the numbers didn't look that great this month? And people are starting to yell at each other because that's what always happens is, well, it's not my fault, it's their fault. What should the CEO do in that meeting to gain some control and focus on solutions instead of blame?
Um, and this might sound a little out of left field, but when I have a couple different people that are really at odds, I say, okay, put yourself in, you're going to be him, you're going to be her. Switch places. Now let's have a conversation. Remember, you're the
Woo!
other person now. So let's figure out what's going on and what you're feeling and why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. Because having people that are passionate about succeeding
Mhm.
is great, right?
Yeah.
But you need to think about, okay, well, that's all well and good, but you need to deliver also. So I need to understand what you're feeling and why you're hurt or why you're upset or why you're pissed off or
Mhm.
whatever. I get it. It's hitting your pocketbook. Okay. But in order to deliver, we need to figure out what's the root cause of the problem. And what I always like to say is be hard on the problem, soft on the people. So if you're not understanding each other, you're talking past each other, try switch roles, and then you're going to be in that other person's shoes, and that will give you a whole new perspective on what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what they're going through. And look, I try to do this outside the office if it's really a bad situation. Let's go to, an offsite. Let's go to, it could be anything. I mean, I could take my team, let's go to axe throwing, have a beer, do some axe throwing, and then let's have a conversation. I mean, literally, let's go do something fun, get it all out of your system, and now let's go sit down and work through this problem.
Yes, I love that. I kind of think you brought marital counseling to the boardroom.
Exactly.
I
It
love
actually
that.
works. I'm telling you, it actually works.
Folks are folks, right?
Right.
Just because you put on a suit doesn't make you any different than who you are at home. Oh, that's glorious.
Exactly.
I love that. Okay, let's see. So, enough about work. Why don't you tell us something that you do aside from axe throwing, apparently, just for fun?
Let's see. So my jam is cooking. Love to cook. Oh, I put together all sorts of meals all the time. Look, on the weekends, right? Not during the week. But, I plan ahead like I'll give you an example. It's always lobster. It's always a menu that, I've never made before. So it's always dishes I've never made before. She doesn't know ahead of time. She knows it's lobster, but she never knows, right? So it
Ooh,
could be lobster ravioli, it could be, lobster thermidor, it could be anything. So, I've done for 12 years a different dish every year. So I love to cook and I will do the whole thing. It could be ossobuco or polenta, it could be stir fry, it could be anything.
I love that. We cook all cuisines. I mean, I live in Southern California. You can get any ingredient you want, and it's so fun to play in the kitchen. Me too. And always on the weekends. Like, it's Tuesday, and my husband's like, "What for dinner?" I'm like, "Whatever's in the fridge is for dinner." Like, don't add me with that. No, that is wonderful. That's all right, William. Well, thank you for joining me on Revenue Remix. For those of you joining from the car or the gym, remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and our YouTube channel for more insights and interviews. I appreciate the listen, and I will see you all next week.